Okay. Yeah. Seems like everyone's had an interesting conversation.
Okay,
What's that?
time to turn your microphones on. We're green, we're ready to go.
He was all for it.
Good evening. Thank you all for showing up. We have a quorum. We have 21 members is my calculation, so we have more than 11 people, so we have a quorum, which is a good start. Tonight we're going to take a look at a lot of things that have to do with going on in this building, the actual sort of administration, planning and codes, the Opera House. Those are the topics.
Thank you, yes.
You're gonna pay for it.
Is that in the budget? Well, okay, yeah.
We're saving money. One preliminary question I have is Maria Libby, who's the superintendent now of the school district, has agreed or offered to come down and sort of give us a quick presentation of what the school budget looks like, if we're interested in that. And I thought the night to do that might be the 21st of March, which is a couple weeks from now, but that's a fairly busy night. That includes the library, going over debt service, capital reserves, capital improvements, which will take some time. We also can take a look at the snow bowl and the wastewater treatment plant that night. We don't really have an active role in their budgets, but they've been coming in and presenting to us. The other option would be to have her come on Thursday, the 28th, which is a more open schedule, but that's sort of our wrap-up meeting where we take a look at everything and decide if we're going to make any final tweaks before we vote on a budget recommendation. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Can she not come next week? Or is that?
Well, next
I mean,
week
it's
is
full as
pretty
well,
busy,
but-
you know, with the police and fire and that tends to, and public works, that's a pretty full schedule for us. I mean, the library, typically isn't that long a presentation an issue unless something comes up. Mark?
How are they coming on their budget? Will they be done by then?
I don't know that we're expecting them to be done, other than giving us sort of a feel as to where they think they're going. And I think ultimately we vote on the budget at the June election, right? So it's always kind of up for final approval, as of course is our work. But you think another week would give them more time?
I'm thinking the later the better, give them a chance to have their budget more prepared.
Yeah.
They are having their public hearing on the 27th of March.
27th?
Sorry, public input.
And the other, we don't obviously have any control over the school budget. It's not something that's needed for us to review or hear about it. But just given that it all plays into what our mill rate ends up being, it might be a useful hearing. It means that if we do it on the 28th, which if we go later, means we're going to likely have a longer final meeting.
I remember the final meeting last year being pretty short.
Yes,
I feel like
it
we had
was.
extra time.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah.
Everybody seemed real happy about that.
How long would her presentation be?
I don't know.
Yeah, I would assume that her giving us 10 or 15 minutes of outline, and then we would certainly have 15 minutes of questions, I would think. So I would plan on at least a half an hour for something like that.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Do it the 28th.
We'll try it the 28th? Okay. 28th, okay?
Yep, I'll
So
let her
you'll
know.
catch up with her, and
Yes.
that would be great. Thank you. Anybody have any preliminary questions, comments? No? Okay. So, I guess. you ready to go? Are you our first witness?
I'm your first witness. All right. So the first cost center that we'll be talking about is the administration and finance area of the budget. And this is really where my department sits, so the town manager's office, myself and Janice, along with the finance department and the town clerk and all those sorts of administrative functions of the town. So really, I'd just like to point out that this year, the sort of more significant changes to, as compared to FY19, can be attributed to wages and benefits, and a lot of that comes from a proposal to make a position that's currently 25 hours, 30 hours a week, and Jody can talk a little bit more about that. As well as there was some difference in the communications line. Traditionally, some of the cost of the phone system had been put in the IT budget, and we wanted to pull that out just so it's reflected the true cost here. We also do have a new phone system. It's a voice over internet protocol system in the town office. We were hoping that elections this year could be a little bit lower, but we wanted to plan for a potential state legislative change that had to do with 2020 presidential primaries. And I think that those were the major areas within that budget that had changed.
Yep.
What is that legislative change or that might happen?
Well, I actually have something from my clerk. I won't read it verbatim, but apparently there is, this is from the MMA Executive Committee, that, let's see, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, I got the wrong page. Dues and services.
Excuse me.
Oh, maybe I didn't bring it with me. Basically what it was is that there's a bill supposedly going to the legislature for approval of having a presidential primary back, which would require a lot of staff time.
Okay. Yep, that would certainly add something to it. Okay, thank you.
So, any questions?
I do have a question about the note for 510 on health insurance. Last week when we were talking about that, I got the impression that there was no employee contribution at all to that, but it seems like there's something about a cost difference depending on what they pick. What is that about?
So anybody hired post 2007, they pay 20% for dependents, depending on the plan that they get. If they get the lowest cost health insurance plan, though, the town pays 100% of the cost.
Okay, so there's the employees, the employee contribution is only for dependents. All employees who are full-time get 100% coverage.
Yes.
Other question, Kip?
And the 20,000 increase in insurance, is that because of a change in somebody's position or?
That's from the position going from 25 hours a week to 30. That kicks it into full-time and eligible for benefits.
Anyone else? Any other? Yes?
There's, didn't you say last week there's going to be a 3% increase in salaries?
Yes, and that would be reflected in the full-time wages line.
The top line,
Yeah.
So yeah, that it does account for some of the difference as well between this proposed financial year and the current financial year we're in.
so the top line is all the same people you have this year, one person going up to full-time plus the 3%?
Correct. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what is the wellness program? It doesn't seem like a lot of money, and I'm just wondering what you do.
Yeah, so we have a wellness committee made up of employees, and they come up with programs to try to get everybody in the organization to participate in to improve employee
This is
health.
just a little seed fund for them to.
Yeah, just to give them, if they want to, I don't know, have classes. There's been some wellness classes and events.
Yep.
With the communications, you had said that went up 7,000 for coming out of the IT budget. So when we get to the IT budget, will we see a decrease in 7,000 there?
There is a decrease in the IT budget. I don't think it's exactly a 7,000, because we went up in a few other areas for a few reasons, but we can talk a bit more about that when we get there. We're kind of in a transition point with our IT where we're trying to, move away to, we transitioned to Office 365. We're trying to get off physical servers to cloud-based servers, but we're not quite there yet. So we've still got some of the costs that you would have from having those physical servers there, as well as the licensing for the software, so.
So by going to 365, we should see a long-term savings or a large savings.
That's the hope.
Because what are you doing, the virtual or the full license?
It's going to be a full license.
So you're looking at $10 a head count.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
So the idea is, we're eventually going to get all of our data off those servers, but we're not quite there yet for a few reasons. So we're that awkward period where we're
And when I'm with telecom, are you guys looking at legacy telecom systems, or are you looking at something like a MOO or a virtualized system that would also lower the cost?
Yeah, we're voice over internet protocol now system, so it's all virtual. So it's, a little bit higher in terms of like the month-to-month licensing or just the fee for the system, but, the physical plant cost and the cost of maintenance hopefully will be lower than what we were paying with an old system.
Anybody else got any? Yes.
The line item for mileage, it looks like it's under budgeted versus actuals. Can you explain that?
So the mileage stipend?
With 1201.
18, you were 3,348, and you're budgeting 500.
This was actually a result of hiring the new town manager back in 2017, and part of her contract was the mileage stipend as opposed to the prior town manager. So that represents that expense.
Oh, okay,
to her.
thank you.
The credit card fee line, I'm assuming that we do not accept credit cards in our town office, and that's the reason why we have no fees for that?
We go through what's called Inform Me to accept credit card payments, and we pass that fee on to the customer. This $200 appropriation, I'm not sure what sparked that back in 2017. It was prior to my arrival, so I don't know the reasoning behind it, but there's no cost to the town when it comes to accepting credit cards.
Okay. So we do accept credit cards at the town office for tax payments and things?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And the fee that goes to it is billed in addition to? Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone want to make any motions? And what do you want to?
Town manager's recommendation.
Town manager's recommendation is $772,200.
Second that.
Any more discussion? Okay, ready to vote? All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Motion passes, thank you.
All right, so our next area is professional services, and this contains all the costs for our legal services, as well as any sort of engineering or other outside consultant that we would get to come in to do a project for us. It's typically, stuff that happens throughout the year that it can be kind of ad hoc. We've tried to plan for it and have a sense of what we're going to do this year. And really the major change from last year is that we had budgeted some money to do a project on the public landing. That project hasn't been done yet. We were lucky enough to get accepted as part of a state study to look at sea level rise within a bunch of different coastal communities and how that infrastructure is going to be impacted. So, a lot of the money that we were going to spend last year on that study, the state is going to do it for us. So that's great for us. But anyway, the expense associated with that study, of course, we didn't budget for it this year because we're not going to be doing it. So it's back to more of the level that we've seen in previous years. I didn't budget for ZBA legal or other legal, because those are lines that we just hadn't been using. And just for accounting reasons, we wanted to simplify the way that we showed our legal expenses. For engineering and professional services, it's about the same level that we've had in the past. There are a few projects that we were hoping to do this year. It had more to do with a few of the parks that we need a little bit of engineering work done on to fix some erosion problems, some things like that. So really, it's just kind of similar to how it's been over the past few years.
So with the town landing, did that money not get spent in 2019?
Correct.
And where does that money end up that did not get spent? Does that go into
So
the surplus?
it's TIF funds, so at this point, it will just stay in that, the TIF account. You know, depending on what we get back from the state, we might have to do some more work to get to a point where we have, you know, plans that we can use to move forward with some sort of work on the public landing. So we still might need to use it, but it's certainly something I'd come back to the budget committee and talk about before we did it.
Mark?
On the legal fund, is this the line that the fee for the attorney's fees when they come to selectmen's meetings and things of that nature, or is that a separate spot?
Nope, that's all here in general legal.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Does the ZBA legal, does that just get put into, when he attends zoning board of appeals, does that get put in planning's budget, or?
We'll just probably charge it to general legal, because a lot of the time, you know, what he does, it's chopping it up is just not very useful to us.
Any other questions, comments?
Yeah. If you look that line, general legal over, like if you go to the actual fiscal year 17, you budgeted 19,000. 19,000 was budgeted. You didn't necessarily do it. And then you ran into some problems, and somebody ran into some problems. I don't know if that was a snowball or what, okay? But you had to add to that. So where did that money come from? And let me just go a little further. The actuals for 18 were about, 14,000 more than was budgeted. And this year you budgeted 16, and then you're going to go to 20, or 19 was budgeted 16,000. What's the status now of that?
So, I mean, the whole budget for this year is quite a bit under because of what we just talked about, you know, but if you look at how we're tracking in terms of legal fees, we're about at about where you'd expect us to be at this point in the year. But I believe in the past, or I can tell you what I would do if I knew that I was kind of, you know, we were up against a situation where we were using more legal resources than we had budgeted. I'd go to the select board and say, hey, it looks like we're, you know, going to run over budget when it comes to legal fees for these reasons. And I would recommend that they'd spend out of their contingency if there were contingency available to cover that overage. Or depending on how we were tracking across our general government cost centers, and I would speak to the finance director to find out how we were doing, we might be at a point where we could absorb that overage without impacting the overall budget. So it really depends on where, you know, what we spend in the year, where we're tracking with everybody, with everything else, and where we're going. But this year, it seems to be that, you know, I mean, there's always like a few things that are a little bit under, a few things that are a little bit over, but in general, most of the areas in the budget are right where you'd expect them to be at this point in time.
The years where we've had high legal fee budgets, have those been planning board related controversies?
I'm sorry, I don't have the history to be able
went
to.
through, we had a couple of years where there were lots and lots of meetings about a development out on Bayview Street, I think, and that probably was the 16-17 budget.
I guess if I was going to make a comment, it looks to me like you've under budgeted not you, but it has been an under-budgeted line
Yeah,
that you've had to deal with.
I think it's hard to see these things coming because somebody files an application, a couple months later they have a hearing. If they don't like the result, then they appeal or fight, or some of these things seem to have multiple hearings. And once you get into that controversy stage, I assume they like to bring the attorney in to keep track of what's going on in real time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing. You never know what's coming. I mean, we try to be proactive in how we use our attorneys so that we're
Yeah.
communicating with them to try to head off issues before they happen, but you can't always.
I think when we get to
predict.
planning, Steve, we can check with the planning department to see if they're aware of any pending developments that might create the need for additional legal attention as hearings go on and that type of thing. Other comments? Questions? Motions?
I'll move $54,000 on the professional services budget line.
Second.
Okay, any more discussion? We got a motion to approve $54,000 on the professional services budget. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you.
All right, so the next budget is for planning, code enforcement, community development, and assessing. So really the most significant changes in this budget from the the current financial year we're in to what's proposed comes down to wages and benefits. A lot of that has to do with staff that was hired either last financial year or this financial year. Another thing to point out in this budget, we were having sort of a difficult time separating some of the assessing versus planning development codes costs and keeping track of all that. So we thought a better way to do it would be to split out some of the assessing costs, like their supplies, their mileage, professional development, organizational dues, all of those sorts of elements. So that's new this year, but I think it'll help us track the different areas in the department much better. Also contained in this budget are some of the smaller budgets for some of our committees. So we've got, zoning board, historic resources, planning board, and the conservation commission are all contained in here. A mistake that I made, we were working on a records preservation project this financial year, and we want to continue working on that project into this year. So I would recommend continuing to fund that at the same level. It has that I didn't fund it, which was a mistake on my part. So those are really, the big areas when it comes to this budget. And we have department heads here as well, if you have any questions about that department.
So are you suggesting that you would like us to amend this budget so at line 103-1208 we add $5,000?
Yes,
And that
please.
is my math right. That would bring us up to $463,699.
Yes.
Any?
What is that, Audra, is records preservation?
So we've got a lot of just physical copies of old, records. It's meetings from, old select board meetings, town meetings.
Scanning.
Yeah.
All that stuff?
Yeah. So just decades and decades
Really
of.
interesting stuff that we've never even put nobody can access it unless you go in the town vault. So it's.
Are you scanning them and putting them into PDFs? And
Yes.
Are they searchable?
They
They
will
are
be.
in fact searchable. And it's astounding. The software is much better than Adobe. You can actually, if you want to afterwards, you can see our scanning setup in the hallway. But it makes it searchable. So you could search for the word, Bach, and see all the different things that the Bach family donated. Right now we have 1925 to 1935. All the select board minutes are searchable. Those are online.
How many more do you have to go?
I mean, it's a question of where you want to stop.
Right, so does that line keep going for the next 10 years, or what are you thinking?
I mean, I think that, yeah, I think it's a pretty discrete project. We're looking at hiring an intern for the summer to get help with the scanning. Really, the scanning equipment hasn't been that expensive, and I think once the town is done with our project, we'll be able to work with like the library or the Camden Rockport Historical Society so they can start digitizing some of their records as well. And that's not something that would be an ongoing cost to us because we've already got the equipment and we've already done our project, but the benefit will be much broader.
Yes, Dick.
Planning board, zoning board secretary, we didn't have a secretary last year?
So we did. I believe that cost was just rolled into, I forget how it was done. Was it? It wasn't done through a stipend. I think it was just done through, was it put in the wages line?
I think it was part of her wages.
Yeah. So we're just separating it out as a stipend this year.
I mean, there's a big difference between FY18 actuals of 32,000 and only 5,000 this year.
Yeah.
Why?
That was her part, that was when she was actually part-time. We separated that out, and that was the line item that the.
So it's full-time now?
So she is 30 hours a week now.
So is she in the wages line now?
She's in the full-time wages.
And that qualifies her for health insurance?
Yes.
Because you're, okay, because that's obviously a big jump from 18 to 19, from 17,000 to 65,000. Are there other?
So a lot of that in FY19 didn't have to do with that one employee. There were, Jeremy came on and he's,
He gets health insurance?
gets health insurance.
And then Steve came on too, and he had different health insurance than Bill.
It's gonna, so Steve Wilson is back as CEO?
Correct. I brought him back after taking him to Bangor.
Following each other around.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Question about the marketing line, the PNC marketing line. It's understandable that it was underspent last year because of the transition, but are there plans to spend that money this year?
Yes, so the money that wasn't spent last year as well as the budget for this year, it's actually what we're going to use to pay for the new website.
Anybody else? Mark?
Make a motion that we approve the manager's request of with the amended amount of 5,000 added in, and whatever the math adds that up to.
I have 463,699. Any other discussion?
Question.
Yes.
What is the planning board doing with $3,000?
Well, planning boards really should go through an annual MMA training annually. And there's, it's about a $600 to have 5 of them go. It's about a $600 price tag. There's a annual training that MMA puts on. And then there's additional support when we may need, say, engineering expertise. We would have to look into that to support the planning board as well. There was a question about the lawyer attorney fees that was asked. I'm trying to limit those as much as possible. I don't envision anything legal-wise moving forward this year. What was that? And advertising fees, yeah.
Yeah, each time you have a meeting, you advertise
Like a public hearing.
Oh, yes.
in the local
Yeah.
paper, right?
Yes.
That comes under that category? Advertising comes under the planning board?
Yeah, for public
Yes,
hearings.
for public hearings,
For their particular meeting.
Yes.
Yeah.
yes. And I will say, we've had a lot of public hearings this year, and we're going to move forward. There's going to be a lot more, because there's more ordinance changes that are in the works for this coming year as well. There's a lot of ordinances moving forward.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Thank you.
All right, so on to the IT budget. So, like we were talking about before, we're kind of at this in-between point where we're trying to transition away as much as we can from physical servers. And we made the first step in that process by converting to Office 365, and, you know, all of our email, it's no longer on a physical server, it's cloud-based. So through that, we're seeing a reduction in sort of maintenance fees, because, you know, you don't have somebody coming in every time there's a problem with the email to work on the server. You know, most of the issues we have are, you know, it'd be Microsoft related, so you call up Microsoft and get support. But we're kind of in that in-between point as well. There's a lot of capabilities with software like that, and there is cost to it, which is, you know, why the licensing line has gone up. But I think as everybody becomes more familiar with the way that the software works, we're gonna start to be able to bring a lot of those servers offline. So some of the servers we have now that are data servers, we'll be able to get rid of them. But we're sort of at the point now where everybody's still learning how to use it, and, you know, the servers aren't at the end of their physical or their usable life. So, you know, I think everybody will become more familiar with how to use it. The servers will be, you know, go offline, and will, you know, basically be.
So is the idea that the maintenance line, that 104, 3008, will reduce over time? Is that the line that we
That's what we're
hope
hoping.
to trim down?
Yeah, and also, you know, we do have some programs we run, like Trio and Vision, and those aren't cloud-based at this point. So, you know, hopefully we'll get to a point where they are as well. So there's less need to have as much IT support as we do now.
By the way, Carrie Leichman, our assessor, is here. Thanks for coming. And thank you, Jeremy, also for hosting us when we went around and met earlier. I had a question, my self-serving question here. I think we talked about the tax maps at one point, that they were a little out of date. Is there something in here that's going to give you the ability to at least update them? Is that what the GIS stuff is?
Exactly. We're probably within 2 weeks' time, it'll probably be accomplished.
Okay, great. Don't you agree?
Oh, and if you've looked at our assessing database lately, you'll see that the full property card is available online now, too.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's nice. A lot of towns have that, and it's a very handy tool for
Yeah.
people who want to know, or those in the real estate business. So. Any questions, comments? Kip, you got any follow-up to some of your earlier IT questions? No? Motions?
I guess I got one more question. So how often do you guys replace your computers?
So we've got a schedule of when everybody's system kind of comes offline, but, you know, we don't strictly adhere to that, because if somebody's machine is still running pretty well, then, you know, they'll go with it a little bit longer.
Gotcha.
You know, and since all of our data is backed up on the cloud or on, you know, a different server, it's not like a.
Do you budget though for a certain amount of computers per year and all that?
Yeah, so in the
That's what's in there.
hardware line, that
That's what that is.
9,000, yeah. And we were able to replace quite a few last year, so we're not thinking that we need to do as many this year. Everybody's in pretty good shape. Oh, I just got a note, so if, I guess that some viewers at home are having a hard time hearing some of us that are farther away from the microphones. So if everybody could make an effort to talk towards them or into them a little bit more, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Which is basically impossible.
That's right.
Okay, does any, Mark?
I'd like to make a motion, we approve the 80,400 as requested.
Okay, we have a motion made and seconded to approve the town manager's and department head request of $80,400 for the information technology account. Any more discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, motion passes.
All right, so the next area is our insurances. So I remember we had the discussion last year, we changed insurance providers. We were going with Maine Municipal Association for all of our sort of general town insurance, and we were able to save quite a bit of money by switching providers. The kind of difference in that we learned this year is that they don't bill separately per each, they don't bill for like, you know, general liability, auto, property, all of these items separately. It's just kind of, you know, one bill that we get for property and casualty that covers all of these areas. So that's why we've chunked them together under general liability under 67,000. And there is a little bit of a premium increase this year in that area, as well as a little bit in the workers' comp insurance as well. But it's, you know, everything is still looking pretty good in terms of, you know, workers' comp is the one that we really watch very closely because, you know, if we don't have a good program in place, it's really easy for that to get quite out of control. So that's something that everybody's paying very, very close attention to. We have a really great safety committee. They're very proactive. Everybody is very aware of our history and the need to be incredibly diligent about, you know, safety across the organization. So, you know, that's something that we're going to keep paying attention to. We're hoping that this year will be our first dividend payment because that's another feature of MEMIC, which is who covers us for workers' comp insurance. They pay out dividend checks if you're performing well, and they're very happy with how we've been doing if you compare where we were, you know, 3-4 years ago to where we are now.
How is that dividend reflected, or if that dividend comes in, what happens?
Where does it go?
Does it show as a revenue item, the mimic dividend?
Yes. Yeah, so it would come in as revenue and, yeah. Yes.
How have they been with claims, and have we had any claims?
Well, we've had a few, but it's not anywhere near the level where we were a little while ago. And
So, I'm sorry, so the insurance dividend of actual for 18 was 3,248? Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Let me just,
Page 2 of your revenues.
in that line, then that's what it was.
Line 90.
It may have also been, and I can pull up the detail, it might have been any claims on other types of property, property insurance or whatnot. It may have gone into there as well, so.
I'm sorry. You were saying?
that's about it, unless there are any other questions.
The only comment I have on the insurance breakout here is that in the future, when you do your block amount, it is kind of handy to understand what are all the different things you're insuring. So in perhaps your comments underneath, it would be useful just to list what they are so that we know that we are in fact covering these types of things. Because once you do it in a bunch and just call it insurance, it kind of hides from us what all the components are. But certainly in the dialogue boxes, if you kept that up, I think that would be good.
Absolutely. And there are some, there's some areas that we can change, like we're, by our charter, this is just an interesting fact, but our charter requires us to bond all employees. But the way that our insurance policy works, it covers a lot of the things that we're bonding, so we really don't need to bond them, but because we're required to by charter, we do anyway. So, there are just a few little, and it adds up across the organization, all the people that we need to bond. So, that's in the future. It's a discussion for the Charter Commission, but that's like an administrative area that can be changed that would save us a little bit of money.
Any more discussion? Kips?
sort of one, I mean, I think you guys should be recognized for what you did to that workman's comp line. I mean, that's $100,000 in, what, 4 years?
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, is there a chance for that to even further decrease with the efforts you guys are putting in place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all based on your experience. So, the better the safety committee does in reducing incidences, the better it's going to get. And I think that, we've got some really proactive people. One of our biggest risks as a town, of course, is the snowball. And it's, we've got people who come on, they're sort of casual, seasonal staff, and, they have to come in and be trained up in a really short amount of time. And I just think that they've done a lot at the snowball to get people who are there kind of on a casual, part-time basis to be very conscious of, safety in general and what they need to do to protect themselves and keep themselves healthy. So, a lot of good work done by the safety committee, working with other departments, particularly our high-risk departments, to identify that sort of stuff and, make everybody mindful of it. Really, I mean, it's just building a culture, and it took us a little bit of time, and I think we're getting there. There's always ways that we can improve, but we're much better than where we used to be. And that's a lot. It's just the employees paying attention, being diligent, and really making it a part of what they do. So all credit to the employees of the town for that.
Any more questions, comments, motions?
I'll make the motion. We approve the amount requested by the town manager.
Okay. Second. And anyone else for discussion? So we have a motion to approve the town manager request of $220,700 for insurances. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, so we're on to the Opera House Town Office Building. So I asked Dave Morrison, who's the director of the Opera House, to come up and talk about this budget as well as the Opera House Auditorium, which is the next budget area.
Good evening, everybody. 0106 is the building is kind of covered by two budget lines, and in simple terms, I think of 0106 as sort of the town office, separate from the Opera House and theater space. So a lot of it is just utilities, the cost being shared 50-50, whether it's heat and air conditioning and fire alarm, sprinkler system, and so on. So the budget that you see, there's really no change. The only change is we slightly reduced 3014, which is the contracted cleaning cost, mainly because we haven't needed it so much. Partly the compliment goes to our current custodian, who's very good. So other than that, the number is pretty flat.
And we will get to, when we talk about capital improvements, we will talk about some major repairs that need to be done on this building, but that's for
Another day.
time. Yeah.
So the health insurance line is down about half.
Yeah, that's a result of when we plan to hire, we did hire a new custodian this past year. And so we have to budget for the most expensive family. And whether they choose the family, if they go with a single, that's reflective in the.
So this is sort of reflecting actual versus
Yes.
anticipated.
Yeah.
Yes, Mark?
Yes, you say that you're flatline, but you're actually down 7.4%. And a question for the 19 budget, how are you managing at this point in time?
I think we are slightly under. Does that sound right, Jody?
I'm going
Sorry.
to dig out my report and I'm going to tell you
Okay.
where we are. This would be as of February 28th.
Oh, you're looking. I'm just going to say something. Full disclosure, I tend to sort of plug in the utility numbers. And I don't deal with wages and benefits quite so much. So I'm not a good person to answer if the change is there, whereas Audra or Jody could.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that they had an employee who took a lower cost health insurance, which probably the actuals will show us that we're going to be a lot closer to 10,200 at the end of this fiscal year. And so that's why they're prompted to budget lower for the next year. But going into the year, they didn't know what the insurance request is going to be. Does that sound?
That's correct, yeah. And at this point, as of the end of February, we should be about 66% through our year. And the Opera House, I'm sorry, the town office is about 55% through their budget, so.
Thank you.
I have a question on revenues. Can I ask you about that, or is that, so if Opera House revenues were budgeted for 50,000 this year and last year, is that the revenues from shows, the whole thing, or is that?
The revenue from rentals.
Rentals, okay. And that's not for putting on concerts or other shows? So where does the revenue from that show up?
So we have these special little things called restricted accounts. And for things like the Opera House shows, the idea is, and I don't know how this originally started, and this took Jody and myself
sweat and
and Jody
tears.
a long time to kind of, and just when we figured it all out, something else happens. So the idea is that with these restricted accounts, they should generally pay for themselves. So they should all, either balance out at zero, so the cost of putting on a show sort of covers itself, or you make a little bit of money. And so over the years, we've sort of made enough money from, these shows cumulatively to keep, putting other ones on. They're kind of like seed funding. They continue putting other shows on. But it all kind of sits outside of the operating budget that you see. But we all recognize that that isn't the optimal way to do it. So we want to rethink how we present the Opera House
So when
budget.
we get to revenues, can we have a fuller discussion on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to sidetrack.
No, it's a good
It
question.
seemed like I couldn't figure out, where'd all the Mallet Brothers money go?
Right. No, it's a great question, and I definitely want to talk about it with the Budget Committee, because we'd like to do the Opera House auditorium budget differently in the future. We'd like to make it, it would still be for the Budget Committee to approve, but it would look a little bit more like how we do the wastewater or snowball budget.
Right.
So you'd get to see
Because some of
those
that,
different sources of revenue coming in more.
right, some of the revenue from the shows hopefully goes to accounts that help for repair, maintenance, and, some reserves for that, because certainly there's wear and tear when you do those, so.
Yeah, and we get sponsorships and donations, so.
Yes,
A general information question. When we have certain events in the Opera House that require security, who pays for that?
Usually it's police department.
Yep. And if it's a rental event that requires security, it gets charged to the renter. And if it's an Opera House production, it becomes part of the budget for that production.
Good.
So for example, I can give you an example. Camden Conference, very often, if it is a bit of a provocative subject, and they will err on the side of caution and have an officer plainclothes here. Happily, it's never really been needed, but that, in their case, they contract directly with the police department.
And that shows up as the special detail line in the police budget, and then the police revenue that you'd see in the revenue area.
Okay.
learn a lot of interesting things here, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, Kevin?
Seriously, can you talk about the solar electricity delivery line? I'm just curious.
Say, I cannot, but someone here can.
So I think that's all part of the power purchase agreement.
It's actually the delivery fee for us to utilize the solar power. CMP charges us to receive the solar power. It's about $15 $15 to $20 a month. I'm not even sure when the solar panels went in. Was it prior to my arrival?
No, it
I'm
was,
not-
well, I mean, close.
Okay.
So it was, did we vote on that? Everyone voted on it in September 2017.
Okay, so just,
Yeah.
okay, so that was never an appropriation, or maybe not even considered at that point. So based on the expenses that we incurred in FY '18, and then it became apparent that it was going to be a $15 a month fee, so around $15 a month.
So are we, it's not apparent here, but are we seeing offsets in electricity costs because of the solar farm yet? I mean, it doesn't look like it when I look at the electricity line.
I can speak a little bit to that from my small experience being in the Lincolnville town office. It's a matter of actually changing the supply and what type of electricity we're receiving. So the rates are kind of going to be the same to what CMP's been charging us, but it's from a different resource. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because, okay.
Basically, it's a plant of water in which we power, which we draw some water off of, and the solar system is providing some water into that pump.
It's a push, is what you're saying.
We're paying for it at 14.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is just a hair above CMP rate.
It's a push.
But what will happen when we pay off the solar farm, then we will no longer have that cost. And the power will be free at that point.
And that's what, 20 years?
It depends when we make a deal to close out the deal with the PPA with Revision Energy. It could be 7 years or something like 7 years, 11 years. That's still to be decided.
Lifespan is about 20 years in those panels, so we'll get about a 50% benefit, really.
Actually, up to 40 years.
Okay.
Any other questions? Motions?
I make a motion that we accept the department, the town manager's recommendation.
Solar panels will be like the dam. Lifespan, it goes
Second?
107. Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion made and seconded to accept the town manager request for Opera House / town office building of $92,800. Any more discussion? Ready to vote? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, so the next area that we'll be looking at is the Opera House Auditorium. So this is really the performing arts venue of the Opera House as opposed to the building itself.
Yes, so again, a lot of the utilities are shared with the previous account, HVAC and sprinkler security, so forth. Again, this number, there's not a lot of change. A couple of lines have gone down slightly just to try and reflect kind of real usage. The marketing line has gone up a little bit, and that's for two reasons. One, to reflect real usage, and two, we're just being a little bit more aggressive about using our marketing and advertising now, and it's, I think it's really effective to help raise our profile in the area and bring more people to shows and therefore help with our income. So that has gone up slightly. And the third change is a slight increase in part-time wages. We would like to try to increase with special projects and some of our marketing and online things. A person who currently works for us, Karina Shorten, who's amazing, is leaving because she's about to have a baby. However, she has an enormous amount of institutional memory, and a lot of what she does can be done remotely. So by adding a few part-time hours, that would allow us to just get more work done in what we hope is a frugal way, because it doesn't require some of the additional costs from hiring an extra person. So that position would be filled, and then she would be available to us for special projects and support when we need it, and so forth.
Can you, I don't know if this is you or Audra, but we've got an increase in full-time wages, but yet we've got a pretty big drop in health insurance?
So a lot of that, I think, comes down to the staffing change that Dave was just talking about. So Karina's leaving, and she was 30, was she 30 hours a week?
25.
Oh, so she wasn't. So, that's the custodian as well, because that position is split between the town office as well as the auditorium. That's the difference, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Does the change in my position, is that reflected anyway? or-
That's a little bit of
The wages?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and the insurance decrease again is because what was appropriated versus what was selected by those employees. And in this case, it looks to be, they're choosing the single.
Just to make sure we're all clear, we may have gone over this before, but what we just voted on previously was about this building, and now what we're looking at is actually operation of the auditorium, and personnel and other expenses are allocated to each one. So altogether, they comprise the whole operation of the building, auditorium, but it's been allocated out. Just maybe everybody already gets that. Good? All right. Questions? Yes.
Why the reduction in cleaning cost?
We haven't needed to use it so much, happily. There was a time when we would hire out to do carpet cleaning or window washing or some of these other things, and we've been able to just take them in and have them done in-house more. So in years past, we haven't had to really max that line out. Reduced it a little bit.
I know we just discussed it, but your electricity line, your budget is down $2,000 from what it was in 18. And is the combined effort between the two sections gone down, or?
I think our actuals have just been a little bit lower than what was budgeted in the past, and
Right.
so we just looked at reducing that to be more in line with the actuals.
They've been marketing to tell us to wear our jackets, keeping the heat down.
Branded fleeces.
Shows that happen in the dark.
Yes, Tom?
Yeah, your overtime position, you were at actual in fiscal year 18 at 11,000 and you're only budgeting 2,000? Was that an anomaly in 18?
Do you want me to speak to that, or would you like to?
Sure, I can add anything.
Okay. I think, and you can tell me if this is true, that had to do with a staffing change. When the prior manager left and I was offered the job and took over, there was this period of limbo where, for one reason or another, there was a lot of overtime. Part of it was we weren't able to fill certain positions while it was in transition, and then there was also a bit of a lag while the manager position was kind of redefined, which affected its job classification, which affected the money. So that transition contributed a lot of overtime, and now that that transition is complete, the need is way down.
Right, and part of it was, at the time, Dave in particular was not a salaried employee, he was an hourly employee, and then there was some other, staff transition, elements that had to do with that, but Dave's now a salaried employee, so,
Okay.
yeah, so we have a little bit more certainty around hours and overtime.
Thank you.
Any more questions, comments, motions?
I'll make a motion. I'll
Okay.
make a motion that we accept the town manager's recommended budget for the Opera House Auditorium for $293,900.
Second.
Any more discussion? Bring the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Are we all done?
Thank you very much.
It's too bad Randy's not here.
What's the handout?
Going.
Who's that?
I said, it's too bad Randy's not here. We could just keep going. Oh,
Where does this go?
Yeah,
Oh.
so what's the handout? Looks
So,
familiar.
one of the select board members, and I think this was a good catch, they pointed out that it was kind of difficult for everyone to see what the bottom line was on the budget. It's in there, but I think it's in the very back, and it's kind of buried, so it's difficult to see. So we thought that we would kind of show the overall expenses, overall revenues, and the net position of the town. So that's what this addition is.
So then, as we look at this, then what we are potentially facing is a 3.22% increase in total budget over last year?
Yes. So we just wanted that to be very clear.
And the question is, where does it go in the notebook?
That's what I should have.
You asked that.
Line in tab 2 up front.
The other night at select board meeting, you mentioned the budget a little bit and talking about the mill rate. And with the 6.35% increase, if that holds true, approximately what will that do to our mill rate?
So it's 6.35
35.
in expenses, but we're proposing some revenue to offset that, some different revenues to offset that, so it'd be about 3.2%. And I think that I calculated so theoretically, if we didn't grow in value at all this year and we just stayed flat, which I don't think is very likely, I think we are going to pick up some value, we'd be looking at maybe 17, 18 cents
Per
per thousand.
valuation.
Plus the school.
Oh, I'm just talking
Yeah.
about here.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
And the current mill rate for this past year was
88.
So that would potentially have an impact by itself of putting us slightly over 15?
It could.
Is that,
But if it goes up 18 cents, you're talking 15 something, 1506.
1506, right.
Dyslexic, I could come up with any number.
good discussion, though. I mean, that's really what we're here for, sort of this bottom line and the impact on the mill rate. And, these are all the key numbers that we're going to ultimately making the decision on. One of the things that we didn't do in the intro meeting that I think we did last time, but this bottom line increase number is sort of, are we okay with it as a group? Is it way out of bounds, too high, or something like that? I think that was, in the past, sometimes we would get to the end of the budget process and see that the increase was a lot greater than what we had thought about. So I should have brought this up at the first meeting, but thank you for doing that now, because that's a really key thing for us to focus on when we get to the end of the show. If we've been sticking pretty much to, as we've been going so far, this will be the increase that we're proposing. Next week, we have police, fire, we've got emergency medical services. Is that the ambulance?
Yes.
Is that going to be a lengthy discussion?
Not this year, but I mean, I would like to speak to the budget committee about just generally levels of service and thoughts on it. It's not going to impact the budget this year, but it would be good to get everybody's input about future years and what we might want to do. Because I think the more that people talk about it across town, the better understanding we're going to have of what everybody wants and what everybody thinks about what we're currently doing.
Okay, so I think, given that we have 3 significant departments plus that discussion, will probably be a little bit longer meeting. Hard to believe it's only 20 to 8. Yes, Mark?
I know that we may not have any say on this, but is there any point in our discussions where we discuss the county budget at all?
Well, Typically, no.
I don't see it listed here.
Typically, no, but, you know, we could ask Randy Stearns, who's the Camden representative to the Knox County Budget Committee, to come in and chat with the group.
Would like to at least hear.
Yeah, that might be a good add-on for the 28th.
I'd be happy to get in touch with Randy, and he's been doing it for a long time, so I'm sure he'd be.
Is that approximate percentage of our total dollar that goes towards the county?
I don't know off the top of my head.
It's on the, it's on the tax bill.
I think it was like 6%.
Okay, and there's so much for the school, so much for municipality, and so much for county. Those are the three
Yes.
breakdowns.
Yep. So I know school's about 61, we're 32, and they're, whatever the difference is, yeah, those together.
61, 32,
Right, right, them too.
yeah, 7.
I'll say it was 6.
Okay, motion to adjourn? Any discussion?
Time to go home.
Vote on adjournment?
Sure.
Okay, opposed? Thank you. Thank you for coming.